Where we left off last week as we moved into this next sign, as today we are going to talk about the sign of His presence. And as we do, how many of you really don't like being alone? Few of you? Okay. And sometimes being alone is okay in certain circumstances, right? You know, it can be a good thing. And even in this lesson today, even in this story today, Jesus is going to go off to be alone. But even in that, every time Jesus goes off to be alone, he's really not going off to be alone, is he? No. He's always going off to be alone with his Father, right? Or he's going off to spend time, you know what I mean, communing with his Father, that type of thing. But there are certain circumstances in life where it's not good to be alone. A lot of us, I think as kids or whatnot, had times or situations where just the presence of somebody else, a parent, a grandparent, someone like that, could be a really good thing. Just in my own life, and I know some of you have had more experiences even with this than me, but just even going to a different place, going through an airport, can be like, yeah, that's not much fun when you're all by yourself. You know what I mean? I remember the time that I went on a mission trip to Istanbul, Turkey, and was by myself. And where literally fly into that airport, you know what I mean? And nobody speaks your language, you know what I mean? You feel completely isolated, and the only instructions that you have are go out, once you get through the deal, go outside, walk down to the second bench on the side of the street, sit down, and some complete stranger will come and meet you there, right? And I was, anyway, and it's closed country to, you know what I mean, and so I was bringing in a bunch of stuff. For homeschool, basically, but type things, and just even that was, you know what I mean. But I just remember that, and even the person that was coming to meet me was not the missionary that I was working with or anything. They were literally just some random person, you know what I mean, that had access, that they got in touch with, that had access to a car that was going to come pick me up and then just take me and drop me off at a hotel for the night where missionaries were going to come and meet me the next day. But I just remember that whole experience, and just when that person finally walked up and said, "Are you Steve?" And I'm like, yes, hallelujah, thank the Lord, I am not alone. You know what I mean? Because that just was like one of those experiences where you're just like, and I've done that before, but that was the only time, and the thing about, anyway, that's the only time I've ever done that all by myself. You know what I mean? It's one thing if you're doing it with a group of people, you know what I mean? Because at least you got other people around, you got somebody to lean on, you know what I mean? Talk about. But when you're trying to figure it out and you're going through nothing, anyway. So, big relief for somebody just to come up and say, "Are you Steve?" And then just say, "Yes, I am." And then, you know what I mean? And a lot of that just kind of went away. But a lot of us are familiar with that feeling of being alone in the dark or being in an unfamiliar place. Just going through anything with somebody else can be very, very reassuring. And today we're going to talk about Jesus' presence with us. And in His presence, we have no need for fear. So we're going to continue on here in John chapter 6, and we're going to see Jesus walk on the water and come to the disciples in this. Again, another very familiar story. But as we get, I tell you what, let's just jump into the passage and then I'll back up into the setting for just a minute. So somebody go ahead and read John chapter 6, verses 16 through 18.
When evening came, his disciples went down to the sea, got into a boat, and started across the sea to Capernaum. Darkness had already set in, but Jesus had not yet come to them. A high wind arose, and the sea began to churn.
Okay, so like I said before, this comes really right on the heels, it's the same day, it's the same evening as the feeding of the 5,000. And you'll remember at the end of that, the people began to recognize Jesus, and they kind of want him to become their revolutionary king. They're ready to make him king, but not in the way that he wanted. And so he wants to retreat from them, and we're not told exactly how, but in the other gospel accounts it tells us that he dismissed the crowd. We don't know how he made them go away, but he dismisses the crowd, and he intends to go farther up into the mountain by himself alone. And he dismisses the disciples also, and basically tells them to go ahead and go without him, and that he is going to meet them either at Bethsaida or in Capernaum. We're not exactly sure on those exact details. But they were to go ahead and go across and continue on to Capernaum, and Jesus was going to meet them there. We do see, and that's one of the things I want to talk about for just a second, is John's account of this story is very, very brief, right? We're talking about verse 15 through 21. So we're talking just 6 verses, right? And to me, this story deserves more than 6 verses, right? I mean, this is an amazing sign. And remember, John is referring to all these things as signs and not as miracles, because he wants us to see and focus not on the occurrence itself, but what the occurrence reveals about Jesus. So, sign, not miracle. He wants us to look beyond that. And that's one of the things that I kind of want to challenge us to do a little bit as we're doing this, as we get into our discussion of this morning. Because there's a lot of times we just get caught up in the miracle and not what does the miracle tell us. And then also in that, the other synoptic accounts, we see some details in Matthew and Mark especially that aren't included in John's narrative, and Luke leaves this out altogether. John's narrative is very, very brief, and it's very, very simply told. Now, a lot of times, and while I'm going to bring in some of the things that some of the other gospel writers say about this event, but I just want to caution you guys not to always do that. That can be good, but I want to caution you against it, in that whenever you're reading through one of these things and one of these passages, it's good to try to put it all together, because sometimes that's just the way we are, right? We want to know everything everybody said about a thing, right? But it's also important to think, why did John tell me just this? Right? Or why did Matthew say it this way? Why did Mark record it this way? And so our primary focus this morning, I want it to be, what does John record? And we don't want to in any way to imply that his telling is incomplete, because he told this story the way he wanted to, right? So why? Why does he tell the story this way? And so, just for our first point of discussion, why do we get different accounts to begin with? Why does Matthew have an account of this, and Mark has an account of this, and John has an account of this, and they're all very, very similar, but yet they're different?
They all have different perspectives, different truths.
Okay.
Experiences.
They all have different perspectives. They all have different experiences. Now, they all had the same experience.
Just they saw it differently.
Okay, yeah, they see it differently. I think that comes back to what Lauren's saying, different perspective about it, right? What else?
It also depends on like the details that they remember, and this is actually something that we can use to say, okay, this is how we know that the Gospels are true. If 100% of the details match, that means that they got together and they got their story straight. But instead, they're just telling it like they remembered it, and because we have the general strokes are the same, we can know that it's the truth, but maybe the details change because of what they remember.
Yeah, absolutely. And then I also think that have y'all ever went to see a play or something, and then afterwards y'all get together and talk about it, right? And what do y'all say?
That was great.
Okay, but then you get into the details of
I
it,
like
right?
that part about
And what you really like isn't what Lisa really liked, right? Or she'll say, oh, I thought this part was really good. Or maybe you're part of a book club and y'all get together and you read a book, right? And you're talking about the book. And like, this part, oh, well, this, you know what I mean, was the part that, oh, this really got me. And then somebody else is like, oh, well, I didn't even see that.
Yeah.
Right? Or maybe I missed that even, you know? You read the same book, but for whatever reason, whether your perspective, whether your experience, or whatever the case may have been, you just kind of see it differently. There's also the possibility, and this is just, John was the last one to write. Okay? Matthew's already written, Luke's already written, John's the last one to write. And so there's also just this simple possibility that John knows, hey, everybody's already got this information. And so I don't need to go into all the details. So I'm just going to tell this part, because this was the part that really stuck out to me. Or this is the part that, but I think more importantly than all of that, I think we just have to look at it and say, what does John want me to see? What does the Holy Spirit, as he is getting John, compelling John to write these details down, what does he want me to see? And so, and what we're going to see is, we see this display of Jesus' power over nature, but even more so, I think what John wants us to see is the power, because see, you can read this account, especially in the other gospel accounts, and the main thing you're going to see in them is Jesus' power over nature. Right? He's going to walk on water, guys. That's amazing, right? John doesn't let you hang there very long. John moves you right on from Jesus walking on water to something that's way more important to John. And that's the power of his presence. What Jesus showing up in the middle of your storm does for you. Okay? And so John wants us, I think, to discover the peace of Jesus' presence and being encouraged that he is able to keep us safe. And then something that's really interesting at the end of the story, get us home. Okay? And so, even as we begin, so we just read these first three verses. When evening came, the disciples went down to the sea. They got into the boat. They started across the sea to Capernaum. Darkness had already set in, and Jesus hadn't come to them. And then as they're out on the Sea of Galilee, this high wind comes up, and the sea begins to churn. And so, what do we just take away from? What does that just speak to you? What does that speak into your life? What are just some general takeaways that we can take from just those three verses and apply to our own lives? I know that's really vague.
Sometimes we think that Jesus is not with us, and we start out and try to do it on our own.
Okay? All right? Okay, so, but, just a reminder, they've been sent. Okay? They're not like doing anything wrong. They haven't done anything wrong. He's told them to go. He's told them he's going to meet them. Okay? But, yes, we do try to do it on our own. Okay?
There's this thing that we tend to naively think, I think sometimes, if God's calling us to do something, it's not going to be, we're not going to have any issues. We're not going to have any storms come along. And the disciples are doing exactly what Jesus told them to do, and they run into a life-threatening storm.
Yeah. Yeah.
And there's fear involved.
Hmm?
There's fear, a little bit of uncertainty.
Okay, but I just want to back up from that just a little bit, Rick, in that at this point, they're not afraid. We kind of imply that a little bit, but actually the way this account goes, is anything yet told you they're afraid? Nothing yet, right? And why are they probably not really super afraid? Their experience, right? They have some experience. They're experienced sailors. You know, at least 6 of them are experienced sailors. This isn't something new. This is something that they've dealt with, okay? And so there is what, I want to come back to what Greg said. There is a little bit of this, I got this, right? And John, in his telling of this, they're not really afraid yet, but they're going to be afraid. But the other accounts, though, this is where we get in trouble. This is where we blend them. The other accounts kind of let you think they're afraid of the storm. And we also blend this into an account that happened much earlier, because in that account they are afraid of the storm, and Jesus is asleep in the boat. And so they wake him up, and then he says, "Peace, be still," and he calms the storm at his word, right? So sometimes we blend these stories together, right? In this story, they're not yet afraid. They're going to be afraid when they see Jesus walking on the water. That's actually what's going to make them afraid.
Yeah.
Okay? But just in John's telling of it, they're not yet. But there is that sense that, though, Greg, that we got this. You know what I mean? We're just going to keep on rowing. We're going to keep on churning, and we're going to keep bucking this wind, fighting this wind. And we can go into it. I don't want to spend all the details about the geography and how these winds and storms all happen. I think you guys are aware. You can look that up. But I think just one of the general points that we ought to take away from this is that storms come. Okay? Storms come. Had the disciples done anything wrong? No. Were they actually obeying, probably, Jesus, what he had told them to do? Yep. But storms come. And just in our lives, so I wanted you guys just to consider, and I wish I would have took the time to wrote out these questions and handed them out to you. But I want you to just consider the storms that you may be facing, or the storms that you have experienced, or storms that you know that other people are facing, right? And then, can I just encourage you, just sometime, either right now, sometime this morning, sometime today, take a moment and invite Jesus into that storm. Okay? Just invite Jesus into those places and ask him for his peace. Okay? And that could be something that you're going through. That could be something that somebody else is going through. But just think about a time when you face a real serious struggle that really challenged your abilities, or it really challenged your resolve, and maybe even challenged your faith. And without telling me the details of that storm, why was it so troubling? What, go ahead.
It's the human factor.
Okay?
From our own experiences as growing up and all the things we've seen and felt and all those, you kind of still revert back to yourself as needing to deal with it.
Okay?
Without Jesus, a lot of us, I'm sure, had a time in our lives where we didn't have Jesus in our lives. Mm-hmm. And we thought we was dealing with everything on our own.
Okay? What else, guys?
It's a
Why
different-
was it so troubling?
The uncertainty of not knowing what's at the end.
Okay, just uncertainty, right?
You can't see how it's going to end.
Right? Can't see the end. We can't see the, and I think you get a glimpse of that in this, right? They don't know how, they're just keep fighting, they don't know when the wind's gonna stop. They know the way these storms are. It could last all night. These kind of storms could come up and then just be gone quickly. You just don't know. You don't know how long you may have to endure. You don't know how long before help comes or relief comes or for things just to, for life just to kind of get back to normal, right? What else?
Different type of storm that I've never faced.
Okay? Something totally new. Something, a totally different experience, right? When you were going through those things, what kind of emotions were present during that struggle? What were you feeling? And you know I'm not big on trusting our feelings, right? But what were you feeling?
A lot of times.
Go ahead.
Frustrated.
Frustrated? Oh man, I can relate to that. What else?
Out of control. You feel like you don't have any control over anything.
Yeah.
You're just spinning.
Yeah. And when I'm frustrated and when I feel like I don't have any control over the situation,
Make bad decisions.
I get I make bad decisions. Yeah, well, okay, yeah, I do. But we do. We get angry. We start to question things. You know what I mean? And because of that, we're not always rational. And so we do make bad decisions. Or sometimes we will just get to the point, you may not be that. You might be the person just kicks it into neutral and you can't make any decision.
Right.
And that may not be a good decision. Right? So all of those things are things that can happen to us. Some people, you can experience, you can become bitter. I mean, because a lot of the things, remember, a lot of these storms that come in our life aren't our fault. They didn't do anything wrong. It's just life. It just happened. And when we're going through those kinds of things, when we go through storms, we just kind of need to know that it's not always of our own doing. And it can be very, very difficult, especially if you feel like you're having to face that storm alone. Because most of us, we got somebody, right? You got a husband, you got a wife, you've got a friend, you've got a brother or sister, you've got a parent, you've got somebody with you. But when you feel like you are alone in a storm, can be very, very discouraging, okay? When we feel like we have to face them alone. So let's go ahead and move on and see kind of how this begins to continue to unfold. Now, real quickly, before we do, I just want to remind you again that even though the disciples were challenged by the ferocity of the wind and the waves, but if they're afraid of the storm, the story doesn't tell us that. In fact, Matthew and Luke don't tell us that they're afraid. Okay? Their fear is about to be generated by something else that is just about to happen. Okay? And so this is the situation. Go ahead and somebody read verses 19 and 20.
After they had rowed about 3 or 4 miles, they saw Jesus walking on the sea. He was coming near the boat, and they were afraid. But he said to them, "It is I, don't be afraid."
Okay. So, here's where, okay, I'm going to break my own rule. And I'm going to bring in what somebody else said for just a second. Okay? What am I going to bring in and say? What detail does Mark tell us that is pretty important?
It's a ghost.
Huh?
They think they're seeing a ghost.
Okay, yeah, they're gonna other gospel writers are gonna say they're gonna see a ghost. I'm gonna back up a little bit further than that. The place I want to back up to just for a second is Jesus is up on the mountain alone. and he sees them. Okay?
Yeah.
He sees them. Remember now, he's retreated. He wants to be alone. He just wants to be with his Father. But when he sees his disciples are in need, he goes to them. Okay? So, anyway, just a little thing I want to break my own rule, throw in there for everybody. Jesus actually sees them in the midst of the storm and goes to them. But to what Jim said, though, the other gospel writers are going to say when they see Jesus, so they see Jesus walking on the sea, but they don't recognize him. Okay, and even in this account, even as John's telling it, you get that sense that even though John says, "Hey, it's Jesus," they don't know it's Jesus, right? Because he has to identify himself. So, so when they saw Jesus walking on the sea, okay, and so it's one thing to see something, right? You ever seen something that kind of just made the hair on the back of your neck stand up? Like, what the heck was that? Okay? But then, that's one thing. What if that thing just keeps moving closer and closer and closer to you? Yeah, you kind of like to get out of there, right? You kind of like to. It's kind of like anytime you've ever watched a scary movie and you're screaming at the people on the screen to run. You know what I mean? And they're, it's like, run, get out of there. That type of thing. But they're in a boat. They got nowhere to go.
Row faster.
Row faster, right? I wonder if there wasn't somebody in the boat that's like, hey, row faster, right? Something's out there on the water, and it's coming this way, and we don't know what it is. And why would they have not recognized him?
Dark, fog, could be any of those things.
You walk on the water, yeah.
Yeah, and it's just it's totally unnatural, right? No one walks on water. It would be pretty hard for your mind to make that connection. That whatever this thing is, it looks like it's coming this way, it's getting closer and closer, and starting to look like a person, and it's walking on water, and I'm freaked out.
Then it speaks to you.
What's that?
Then it speaks to you.
Well, that's the good news, though. That's actually going to be the good news for them. But they're afraid because they see something incredible, something unexplainable, unlike anything they've ever seen before. And isn't that what usually generates fear for us? The unknown, the unfamiliar, the unlikely, not knowing how it's going to end or how long it's going to last. Right? The storm was something they'd seen before. Right? Now they might have been like, but it's kind of like us growing up. It's kind of like where we live. We get a big snowstorm. What? Oh well. Seen that before. When Louisiana got a big snowstorm this year. What in the world, right, Chad? I mean, places clear down on the coast got snow. Right? So it's something you've seen before, right? So they've been on the sea. They've navigated storms before. But when somebody's walking on the water, that's an impossible sight. And yet there it was, right before their eyes. And so just in that point. So that in and of itself is an amazing miracle, right? Mm-hmm. What are we to take from that? We'll get into the rest of this in a minute, but what are we to take from this sign of Jesus walking on water? How are we to understand this miracle?
His power over the ocean and,
He has power over nature, right?
Nature.
Just another example of him having, we've seen him have all these different abilities, right? All these different things that he has control over, and he has power over nature. And this is going to be, this is really interesting, okay? To me anyway. I hope it's interesting to you. How does he introduce himself?
The literal translation is I am.
Yeah. Okay. So when we read it right here, he says, why doesn't he say, "Hey, it's Jesus, woohoo, Jesus over here," right? But as he approaches them, what we just read says, "It is I." Okay. Another way this could be translated, and the way that I like it better, is "I am." Why does that matter, I guess? What?
I was just saying it matters a lot because he's identifying himself to them as God. You know, I am. I mean, you know, I know your rule is don't bring others in. You know, but on this case, you know, I'm thinking of the other account where they're fearful, and Jesus speaks to the wind and the waves, peace be still. And then their question is, what manner of man is this who can even command?
Right.
And that sentence was only used in reference to God.
Right.
Only
Right.
reference.
What else should be triggering in our mind when we hear "I am"? What would other people connect this with, or what should we be connecting this with?
The Exodus account.
The Exodus, right?
Tell them I am sent you.
Tell them "I am" sent me. And then what was the last sign in the Exodus? The parting of the Red Sea, right? And so God has power over all of those types of things, and so oh shoot. So here's just a couple things. So then the coming of them walking on the sea suggests a divine epiphany, and it alludes to scriptures such as Psalm 77, verse 16, where it says, "The water saw you, God, the water saw you, and it trembled. Even the depths shook. Your way went through the sea, and your path through the vast water, but your footprints were unseen." Job chapter 9 is exalting God as sovereign creator, and it says, "He who alone stretched out the heavens and treads on the waters of the sea." Right? And so these are all images of he who made the sea is the master of the sea, and he can actually walk upon the sea. And so we can only simply explain this miracle as this powerful mystery of the divine. I am. And there ought to be that connection. And I don't mind pulling other things. I just like, exact parallel accounts. What manner of man is this? And so they had that question the first time. And now there is no question about what. Their question isn't, what manner of man is this? What would their question now maybe be? What manifestation of God is this? And I think that's where they're going. I think that's what they're going to see. Okay. Another quick little thing here. They don't recognize him. You guys know this has become a big deal to me lately. How do they know him? When do they recognize him?
When he speaks.
When he speaks. He doesn't identify himself by name. He did not say who I was, but they recognize him by his voice. 4 chapters from now, Jesus is going to say, "I am the good shepherd, and my sheep know my voice." Do you know his voice? You've never seen him. you don't even have good pictures. No, probably no good illustrations of any idea of what he actually looks like. You may have a picture in your mind, right? If you're one of those people like me that as you read, you kind of see it. You know, you make a picture in your mind.
That's like what you were saying earlier. Everyone sees it different. So
Okay. But do you know his voice? He spoke and they recognized the reassuring voice of Jesus as he speaks to us in our times of hopeless fear brings hope and it brings help. Okay? Think back to your storm. Think back to your struggle. Think back to that time in your life, or maybe something that you've seen somebody else going through right now. How did God make himself known to you in the midst of that struggle?
I look at this account as he meets you where you're at.
Yeah. He comes to us, right? And I think that's so important to realize. And that's why I kind of emphasized earlier that he was on the mountain and he saw. So in the midst of our storms, he comes to us. And sometimes though he comes, how does he come? Because it can be different, right? He comes sometimes in unusual ways or unexpected ways. And I think that's one of the things John wants us to see here. This was an unusual way to come. Right? I don't know that he ever comes this way again. But he comes to us. By whatever means necessary, he comes. And it may be in an unusual way. It may be in a way that you didn't even expect. But he will come to you in the midst of your storm. Okay? And then when he does come, how does your awareness of his presence, how does that kind of displace your fear? Does it make the fear go away?
it calms.
It calms it at least, maybe. It doesn't maybe always remove all of it, right? But it does kind of allay that fear. He carries us through. He gives us a sense of hope. He brings us a sense of peace. Okay?
You know you're not alone.
And just to know you're not alone. That is a huge, huge thing. Especially if you are really alone. And sometimes you could be surrounded by people and be really alone. Right? Still feel really alone. Okay? All right. We got about 6, 7, 8 minutes left. So let's go ahead and jump into the last one. Somebody read verse 21.
Then they were willing to take him on board, and at once the boat was at the shore where they were headed.
Do you get to the end of that verse and just go, A couple different things there that make me go, right? So probably the most obvious one right off the bat is that at once they were where they were supposed to be. So that in and of itself may be another whole miracle all by itself, right? So so that's one thing. But don't miss the first thing that ought to make you go, And that is, they were willing to take him on board. Okay? What? Why is that in there? Why is that stated that way? What's the point? I mean, I'm sorry. If I finally recognize Jesus, dude, get in.
But they probably still have doubts.
Okay.
Sometimes we want to just keep going ahead and doing it on our own.
Okay. Yeah. What else?
To me, this kind of makes me think of, I believe it's in Revelations, I stand at the door and knock, and anyone who opens to me. So he doesn't force himself upon anyone, not even, his children who, know him. He waits for us to invite him in. Because if he just steamrolls right in and doesn't wait for us to allow him, then we don't really recognize it as him.
Absolutely. I think that's it. I think it's all of those things, but I think that's it. Just seeing Jesus and recognizing him were not enough. They had to take hold of him. Right? They had to take him into the boat. And Michaela, what you're talking about right there is absolutely a recurring emphasis in John's gospel. Over and over and over again. John keeps driving home this point that true belief is more than intellectual assent. Right? It requires a spiritual action of personal commitment. For these followers of Jesus, for these disciples, he was someone that they wanted, and certainly someone in that moment that they needed. And so they actively received him. Right? And I think that's something here that John really, he wants us to see. That, yeah, he didn't just barrel through. It's like he comes and then they invite him in. They take hold of him and they bring him into their storm. They bring him into their lives. And then finally we take that last statement just as it reads, right? And at once they were at their destination. What's the point there?
I guess when we accept Jesus, we're where we need to be.
Okay. We're where we need to be, and he gets us home.
That's right.
Okay? And the reason I say home is because Capernaum's home for almost all of them. And especially it's the home base for them during this time of ministry with Jesus. So the overall point is that when Jesus is present in the ship with them, he gets us safely where we're supposed to be. And he brings us home. So there's a lot of things kind of to take, a lot of spiritual truths that can be gleaned from this brief story in John's Gospel. And, we too face stormy times in life. And sometimes those storms come even when we are being faithful. Not always because of disobedience or because of sin. You can be doing everything right and storms still come. Right? We're never outside the watchful eye of the Lord. He comes to us in our time of need. He does what no one else can do. He rescues us from turbulent times.
Yeah, if you look at Job in the Bible, he was doing what he was supposed to do.
Yep.
And
Absolutely.
he had a few storms that came his way.
And I think one of the things, though, that I want us to take away from this also is that Jesus wants to be a part of our lives. He wants to be. But we got to let him get in the boat. We got to take hold of him. We got to receive him. We got to invite him in. And then finally he gets us safely home. Any other thoughts? Any other questions? Anything anybody has?
Steve, I was thinking about just the idea of, this reminds me that I can be thankful in the midst of storms that come along, because those are going to be the times that his presence is going to be like no other time.
Yes. They're the times that his presence means the most. And it's also the times where we just might see the miraculous.
Steve, if you remember, I've mentioned a couple of times that I I pray for trials.
Mm-hmm. I don't recommend that, but yes. Yes, yes.
For that reason.
Yeah, because you can trust him. You can trust in his divine presence. And when we have Jesus, it kind of just reminds, I don't know why, I'm just thinking about that little song that we sing with the kids and Jesus in the boat. You know what I mean? Anyway. But when Jesus is in the boat, we have no need to fear. In his presence, fear subsides and strength arises. Peace comes. Hope is instilled. And Jesus will see us through whatever comes at us, whatever life throws at us. Okay? And why is all that possible? What does John want us to see? Because he is the great I am. He is the divine Son of God. And that is what John wants you to see. John wants you to see the power of his presence. That is the power of his presence means something because he is the divine Son of God. And that's what I think John wants us to see. All right, guys, I just want to encourage you as you leave that you may not be facing a challenge, or a storm right now, but even as we meet and share our prayer time or prayer requests, you know somebody that is. Right? So, that person that is, how can you offer encouragement to them in the midst of their own struggle? Next week, we're going to move on to John chapter 9, and we're going to talk about the sign of his light. John chapter 9, basically the whole chapter. So, all right, guys, have a great morning, great week. We'll see you again next week.